You're listening to the Bulldog Hour, getting you inside the Wilson football program with weekly game previews, recaps, highlights, and interviews. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffoff.
Hello, football fans, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Wilson Football Bulldog Hour. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Mays, alongside of me, co-host Justin Raffoff.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a little bit since we checked in, so we'll get you up to date on all the Wilson football news.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about the end of the Wilson football season. We've got the final two games of the regular season to recap, and then the two games that Wilson played in the 2015 District 3 Quad A Playoffs. And we'll go over highlights of those games, some statistics, our thoughts on each of the contests, and then we'll wrap up with some obviously the players of each of those games, a Player of the Year award, and just some individual accomplishments that we wanted to point out that has happened through the 12-week season that the 2015 Bulldogs took part in. So unfortunately, we are here to completely wrap up. We're hoping to just be doing our second to last show here with another one coming up in a few weeks. But the season came to an end 2 weeks ago now in the playoffs against Central Dauphin East. But, another 10-win season for the Bulldogs. It's, one of the many streaks that they have seen happen recently. We talked about on the last show some of the things that they had already clinched or were about to clinch again. And just to recap them once again, Wilson has 57 consecutive league wins. They won against Penn Manor and Warwick, which we'll talk about in a second, to extend their winning streak in the league to 57, which, again, they're just setting a new record every time they win, a record that they eclipsed against Hempfield in the middle of this season. Was previously owned by Mannheim Central. They have now 52 straight non-losing seasons, 40 straight winning seasons, and they've now won 8 straight outright undefeated league titles, and this was also the 8th straight season with 10 or more wins.
Those are some ridiculous numbers they start to become, I think maybe they lose some of the effect just because people around the program hear about them so often that, they know about those long streaks. But when you sit back and you kind of think about what that means, like 57 straight league wins, that's absurd. When you talk about, 52 consecutive non-losing seasons, things like that, those are just ridiculous numbers, and 40 straight winning seasons. Those are amazing numbers, and it kind of shows you where the program has been and is, and hopefully will continue to be for a long time.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this towards the end of the show. The future is still bright in West Lawn, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of the Lancaster-Lebanon League. There are a lot of starters returning, and not as many as this year, but there's a good amount of starters coming back to look forward to the 2016 season. And there's a lot of underclassmen that will be seniors, or even some sophomores to be juniors that are expected to play quite a large role for the 2016 team. But we're not here to talk about them. I'm sure we'll get to that in the spring and summer. But we're going to focus on the 2015 season and congratulate the seniors going out this year with just some incredible statistics. Like we talked about this before, how many games these seniors got to play.
Right.
They played 12 games this year. They played 15 games last year. And then as sophomores, they were also able to play 13. So, that's 40 games? Yeah. You're only guaranteed 30 if you play a 10-game regular season. You're guaranteed 30 if you play for 3 years. They played an entire season more, right, being a part of these three squads that they were from 2013 through 2015 seasons. So lots of great accomplishments for them. There was actually also a trio that were here for 4 years, and their records are just astronomical when you think about it. When you include the 2012 season, they actually got to play, I believe it was 55 games in 4 years.
It's absurd.
It is absurd to think about it like that. But there'll also be changes coming up, and And Justin and I might actually do a shorter show in the future once everything's ironed out to talk about the reclassification of the PAAA football system. Now, obviously, it actually filters down to all of the sports throughout Pennsylvania, voted on in the fall by the board of directors. Obviously, we're just going to focus on football, though, and we're going to break down exactly what's going to happen in the future, starting with the 2016 season in terms of the 6 classifications that are incoming. There's 4 right now. Where Wilson fits, what opponents will be with them, what opponents are going to drop down and we won't see in the playoffs, and also what the playoff structure will be. But we can't do that now because we don't know yet.
It doesn't exist yet. We just got the information about a week ago on how the schools will actually be divided up. There were all kinds of projections, and most of the projections were pretty accurate. And like Joe mentioned, we'll discuss that at a later point in time. But the playoff structure and the classification, as we know it, has changed in Pennsylvania. Many would say it's long overdue. Some would say it not necessarily a fix; it's just different for the sake of being different. But I guess that depends on who you ask and all those different things. So anyway, moving forward, like we said, the structure will be different. But we're going to get into some of the end of season, the last 2 regular season games and the 2 playoff games. We're going to get into that in just a second here.
Yeah, well, we're going to do it right now. We'll start with week 9 of the regular season. That's when Wilson hosted Penn Manor, and it was not a contest at all.
No.
It's amazing to me how far back Penn Manor has gone in just literally 1 year. We know Coach Mealy resigned to pursue personal, really, to better himself in terms of his education. He's working on a doctorate, so he stepped back to work towards that. Coach Brubaker from Manheim Central moved over and took over the Comets. But you could see over the last few years that the talent pool wasn't as deep.
I think a few years ago that I don't think they could field a freshman team. I think there has been, I don't want to say trouble, that's not the right word, but I think there have been some bumps in the road like that they could see coming for a long time. And everything, it was kind of like a perfect storm. Coaching changes, lack of numbers in the program. Just there were a lot of different things contributing. But yeah, Penn Manor did take a step back this year, and hopefully they can get things moving in the right direction again, because those were some great games, but this was not one of them.
Yeah, 2011 through 2014, Penn Manor was a big stumbling block for Wilson. Now, they never actually did take down Wilson, which they've never done. The Comets have never beaten the Bulldogs. But they've always been a good competition pretty much since I really got back involved with the high school program and working on the sidelines with the social media updates and the pictures, and then now starting this radio show. Back in 2010 or so, Penn Manor really got built up, and for a couple years, I believe it was 2012 and 2013 with Charlie Bell, those were some strong teams. And we played them in the regular season and the playoffs, and they were never an easy out. They were always strong teams, good games. But this year, 2015 version of Penn Manor football, not the greatest. They didn't win a single game. They finished 0-10. Wilson got the better of them, 42-21, and that score is incredibly deceptive because Wilson was up 35-0 in the first quarter.
Yeah, I've never seen a football game like that.
No.
We said at the end of the first quarter, I've never seen a game less competitive than this game, and that may hold true, even though I've been watching some Eagles games that are pretty close.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the game here. We have some highlights. First up here is going to be the first touchdown of the game, which was a 50-yard pass from Colin Powers to John Fox, and that started the scoring off very, very quickly. And actually the first few plays for either team on offense, it kind of ended up being John Fox show, because here you're going to see him pick off the pass and return it deep in Penn Manor territory, setting up Wilson's second touchdown, which we're going to see here at the end of John Fox's interception return. Is going to be an Alex Twyford 1-yard run, and Wilson all of a sudden is going to be up big, and we're only halfway through the first quarter.
Yeah, and as we continue to kind of go through here, Wilson was just dominating. You see, we had talked about, I think at the end of the last show, how Shane Dantzler had gotten back in it, and here we go again.
He weaves, he cut back, and he was dragging defenders down to the Penn Manor 7. and he's going to finish it off here with a 7-yard touchdown run. And all of a sudden, with more than 5 minutes left in the first quarter, Wilson was up 28-0.
Yeah, it was quickly got out of hand.
Yeah,
like I said, it just wasn't competitive at all. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, we're watching a defensive play here, a sack by Isaac Schonauer, and he just ran over the running back trying to block him, and he would have nothing to it. Then the next highlight is a 19-yard touchdown pass from Colin Powers to Adam Close, and with 42 seconds left, Wilson was up 35-0 in the first quarter. Now, there's a couple other big runs here. We're going to highlight a 15-yard run by Shane Dantzler. And that would be one of the last plays that the starting varsity would play. I'm not even sure which quarter, and we may be towards the end of the second or very, very, very early third. Because, again, Wilson was up, I believe, 42-0 at halftime.
Yeah, I think this was still the second quarter. Just it looks like Uhrig is in at quarterback.
Right, so Colin Powers is already taken out at the end of the first half for sophomore Connor Uhrig. Then we saw a little bit of the pack of running back Tommy O'Brien. On 4th and 1, he just carried the pile down the field. And then we're going to see a touchdown pass here from the backup quarterback Connor Uhrig. This will put up Wilson 42-0. So Wilson didn't score it all in the second, but again, they didn't really need to. There wasn't anything. And there you can see on the screen the final score, 42-21 against Penn Manor. So no real resistance whatsoever from that team. It was just ugly. It was fun to see at the time as a Wilson fan. That 35-0 in the first quarter when you could basically do nothing wrong, but in the end,
right. I know. When we saw the end of the game, Penn Manor scored a couple touchdowns late in the fourth quarter. With their starters against many of the younger guys for Wilson. But there were some issues there. The intensity kind of dropped off a little bit, but that happens when you're up 42-0 in a game. Like I said, it from every aspect was as non-competitive as you're going to find. So, needless to say, Wilson rolled through that one. And did you want to give any of the stats?
Yeah. I mean, we can go a little bit. It really is deceiving. Like the final score, you look at the box score, 42-21. Wow, Wilson gave up 21 points to a team that hadn't won a game. Well, they did, but it all came in fourth quarter time against third, fourth stringers. We're talking JV, sophomores, players just finally getting some varsity time. Coach Doms was not too pleased with the effort from those guys getting time on a Friday night. And that's the best they could do against a team that was not very talented.
Right.
And he let them know that. But it really was. If I said, and I mean this, if Wilson plays that whole game, their starters, their key guys play, I think they put 100 on.
They probably could.
I think it would be really close.
Yeah, I definitely say like 80 plus, just because I feel like it would be hard. It would be really
right. I mean, you're not going to get 35 every quarter, but you could easily get 2 each quarter the rest of the way. Which gets you into the 70-some range,
Right.
So
it's possible.
They could have. It's possible. Anything could happen. But it just, that's not what they take their guys out.
No,
they want rest. They want to get. They don't want. It's not the point to embarrass a squad. And Penn Manor just didn't have anything going for it. Hopefully they bounce back next year.
Yeah.
But just looking at some of the stats, again, they're not overwhelming. Wilson had 11 first downs, 158 passing yards, only 283 total yards, 125 rushing yards. Nothing too exciting. I mean, the first quarter was the exciting part where you scored 5 touchdowns. At one point they scored 3 touchdowns in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. They had the kickoff return, they had the huge pass play to Fox, and then the interception by Fox set up the Twyford touchdown. And that's the one thing that I didn't get to show in the highlight was Shane Dantzler returned the opening kickoff. 95 yards, which is one of the longer plays in Wilson history. I couldn't show it, unfortunately, because it wouldn't let me cut that clip out. So we missed the Shane Dantzler 95-yard kickoff return for a touchdown to start the game, but we saw the John Fox 58-yard touchdown and the Fox interception to set up Alex Twyford's touchdown. 21-0 with 8:13 to go in the first quarter. You're not going to get that series of events all the time, obviously, but if Wilson played their guys the whole time, it would have been bad. It just would have wasn't going to be good. So, player of the game. Let's take a look at who we think was the best player on the field. We're only going on about a quarter and a half here in terms of the starters. So it wasn't the easiest to pick. Most of the games haven't been easy. Usually there's been 2 or 3 guys that have stepped up and just had incredible games. For the Penn Manor game, though, we're going to go with senior wide receiver safety John Fox for his efforts in the first quarter. Was kind of the John Fox show. He had 2 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown, 2 tackles, and that interception. Looking at the film and the stats, and from being there and seeing it ourselves, we feel John Fox was the best player on the field against Penn Manor, and once again, he is our player of the game. Wilson came back the next week at home once again in the regular season finale with a chance to clinch not only an 8th straight league title, which they had already guaranteed themselves a share of by beating Penn Manor, but beating Warwick meant that it was going to be their 8th straight outright title, not tying with anyone else, and also going undefeated for 8 straight years. Now, Warwick, 2 of the last 3 years, albeit both of the games at Warwick, have given Wilson a bit of a tussle. And both of those teams, 2012 and 2014, went on to win the district title and go to play in the Western Final. In 2012, down at Warwick, I think Wilson was up maybe 6-0 at halftime, something like that. Yeah. Before getting a talking to and coming out and exploding in the second half and winning that one. Then last year, 2014, again, at one point I believe it was like 3-2 or 6-2. It was interesting. Wilson ended up holding on. I think they won that one 19-2 possibly. I'm not sure Warwick scored other than the safety. So Warwick, despite them not having a lot of success recently, they've given Wilson a game more often than not over the last few years, but that was not the case this year, thankfully. The Bulldogs came out and took care of business and took it to Warwick, winning by a score of 41-7. And Bulldogs locked up their 8th straight league title, 8th straight undefeated run, and stretched their consecutive league victory streak to 57. So let's take a look a little bit at the highlights from the Warwick game. The first one's an interesting one, and I'm only showing it because the coaching staff was not happy with the call. It's actually an onside kick by Warwick, which they apparently recover. But you can see, if you're watching, Coach Doms and the staff not exactly happy. It has to go 10 yards. If it doesn't go 10 yards, the receiving team must touch it before 10 yards for the kicking team to recover. It doesn't look like any of that had happened, and somehow Warwick got the ball 9 yards down the field, which, if you know the rules, that can't really happen. So coaching staff not happy with that, but the kids went out and performed anyways, and within a couple of plays, this was able to happen by way of junior safety Tommy O'Brien picking off the pass, and he took it all the way down to the Warwick 13-yard line, and that then finally was able to set the tone for the Wilson game. And Shane Dancer would take it in from 8 yards out a few plays later, and Wilson really relied on their heavy set. When you have a backfield that features John Fox, Alex Twyford, and Shane Dantzler, it's tough to stop. And these teams at the end of the year definitely had a tough time doing that. We saw it against Manheim Township, Penn Manor, and now once again against Warwick. There was a sack by junior defensive end Alex Twyford. Now we see more from John Fox in the heavy set. And then we're going to see that incredible backfield once again of Twyford, Fox, and Dantzler. But this time Fox gives it to Dantzler for an 11-yard rush. And we're soon going to get the Bulldogs' second touchdown. Again, a Shane Dantzler run. With just 7 minutes left in the first quarter, Wilson's going to be up 14-0 after this 6-yard touchdown by Shane Dantzler. Finally, after so many tries, Mason McElroy was going to find the end zone on a punt return. I believe before this he had at least 2, maybe even 3 punt return touchdowns called back due to penalties, some of which we don't believe were actually penalties. Right. And I'm sure he's seen that on the film, that the phantom penalties called on his punt returns were probably getting to him. But Mason McElroy finally got in the end zone on one. a couple players this year that definitely took it to another level. Ben Harris and Brett Kaufman are looking at the season-to-date stats, and both of them are going to end up on the single-season list for most sacks. So it's great to hear from both of them. We're finishing up some of the highlights here again from Warwick with the victory was a big one, 41-7. Obviously, there's a lot of going on offense. We see more from the heavy set of John Fox, and one of the marquee plays from this season, the shovel pass, generally to Alex Twyford. Although he did fumble there, it was recovered by Wilson, and the Bulldogs would end up punching it in right here, thanks to a hookup between Colin Powers and Jake Gehman. So, finishing the regular season at 9-1, there wasn't, the only time that Wilson really struggled. The game against Mifflin to start the season, the teams were trying to feel each other out. Mifflin's always a tough matchup because of that offense, especially when you're breaking in so many new linemen, as we heard Coach Wolber talk about at the beginning of the season. Then Central Dauphin in Week 3, which we knew one of the best teams in the state, to suffer a 1-point loss at home. You don't want to lose, but that was understandable. Then other than Hempfield in Week 6, which Wilson escaped with a 15-9 victory to set the league victory streak record, Wilson really didn't have many close games. They really, really dominated throughout the season.
Yeah. You kind of talked about it before leading in. Warwick, the last few years, has caused some problems for Wilson. So it was good to see Wilson go out and kind of just handle business from the start, and just be able to kind of work on some things and get some things right and still be able to kind of win handily at the end here, going into the playoffs.
Yeah, just to recap the regular season again, 9-1, 7-0 in the league champs. They were number 2 seed in the District 3 Quad A playoffs. Throughout the 10-week regular season, Wilson was able to rack up 328 points scored to only allowing 115. That was an average game of 33-12, which is just completely misleading because Wilson varsity defense was just electric during the regular season. The starting varsity defense surrendered just 36 points in 10 games, and only 13 of those came in league play. So in 7 games, they only gave up 13 points to league opponents.
That's crazy.
They gave up. Now this is across the whole season. They gave up a field goal to Mifflin. They gave up 20 to Central Dauphin. They gave up a touchdown to McCaskey, and they gave up a touchdown to Manheim Township, but that kick failed. So 36 total points surrendered in 10 games, 3.6 average, and in league, less than 2.
That's absurd.
It is absurd what they were doing during the regular season. Offense, not too bad either. They're actually pretty balanced. They ended up getting 77 first downs through on the ground and 72 in the air. And again, when you look at the way they were getting it in the yards per game, they got 157.8 average on the ground, 177.1 average through the air. So a balanced attack, which is generally a good thing to have.
Yeah,
if one area gets shut down, the other area can pick it up. We saw that against Central Dauphin. The running game couldn't get going, but Colin Powers had a phenomenal game. In some weeks, passing game just not there. Rushing game picked up. And there were many games that Wilson gained over 250 yards on the ground.
Yeah, and like you said, it was a very balanced offensive attack, and it really, especially once they started working in those different sets partway through the year, they really didn't have. A lot of teams weren't sure exactly how to kind of line up and stop it, because they just had so many weapons. Where are you going to go to get those stops? So it was kind of interesting to see how that played out. And like you mentioned a couple times already, handled their business throughout the league play and throughout the regular season. So they were able to kind of extend those streaks that we've talked about, repeatedly on the show.
And we have another player of the game to hand out here for his efforts against Warwick. We finally got to give Shane Dantzler a player of the game. Now, he missed a majority of the regular season recovering from a knee injury. He came back against Conestoga Valley. He was used sparingly, and he finally got going against Township and Penn Manor, and then we saw him play really well against Warwick. He rushed 16 times for 101 yards, scoring 3 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 2 receptions for 7 yards. But it was a good game from Shane Dantzler and the offensive line for their efforts. Shane's our player of the game against Warwick. Well, now it was on to the playoffs for the Bulldogs. And again, I mentioned before, but they were the number 2 seed in District 3 Quad A. Central Dauphin earned the number 1. Local team Exeter was in the 3 spot. And Wilson was looking forward to home field advantage up until their whatever their final game may be. They were going to be at home until the end. And the first round opponent was the 15th-seeded Harrisburg Cougars, which we have seen recently. We saw in 2012. We saw them twice. In 2013, we also had a game against them. And here they are back in the first round of the District 3 Quad A playoffs in 2015.
You also mentioned earlier, we alluded to the different configurations of the playoffs moving forward. Harrisburg is one of those teams that will no longer be in the same classification as Wilson.
Correct.
Harrisburg, I think to the surprise of many people, is not as big of a school as
right. I was very surprised when I saw it.
They will be, I believe, a 5A.
They will be a 5A team. Other 5A teams that Wilson has played recently or has a history with, Cedar Crest dropping down to Section 2 of the LL.
Section 2 of the LL, yeah.
Then Conestoga Valley on our league schedule, at least for the next 2 years. Lebanon moving up for the next 2 years at least, also 5A. And then the big one, Governor Mifflin, our biggest rival, week 1 opponent, since we're not in the same league anymore. They will be 5A, meaning that this was the last chance for the foreseeable future that Wilson and Mifflin could have met in the playoffs, and it wasn't meant to be this season. So those are the big new 5A teams that Wilson could play in the regular season, but can never meet in the playoffs with the way things will be organized in 2016 going forward. But yeah, Wilson and Harrisburg, we remember back in 2012, Harrisburg came in and kind of upset the Bulldogs in week 2 of the regular season. Wilson was expected to do big things in 2012, which they ended up doing. But in week 2, they got upset by the Cougars. Now the teams got to meet in the District 3 final, and Wilson took care of business then and won the district title, their 5th in program history. We then finished our back-to-back regular season meetings with Harrisburg in 2013. With a Wilson team that many thought were going to go, 6-4 and maybe lose some streaks. Obviously, the league victory streak was going to end and all that. They didn't think they were going to compete very much. Well, the 2013 team didn't take that lightly and ran through the league or the regular season schedule undefeated at 10-0 with a victory over Harrisburg in week 2 at Harrisburg on a Saturday morning. So no meeting between the teams in 2014, but then here they are in the first week of the playoffs in 2015. And Wilson didn't have many problems with the Cougars. It kind of was reminiscent of the Penn Manor game from 2 weeks prior.
If you look at the score, I said that the Penn Manor game was as non-competitive as a game I've ever seen. And even though this score was more lopsided, I stand by that statement. This game, it wasn't close. I don't want to give that impression. But at the same time, there was at least Harrisburg had at least the ability to make some plays. Now, they didn't make very many plays throughout the game. Wilson was, again, ready to go and kind of firing on all cylinders here. But even though the score may not indicate it, I feel like Harrisburg, while they struggled, they still had a little bit more going for them, as you can see by the fact that they were a 500 team coming into the playoffs and made the District 3 playoffs. It's a step up from the Penn Manor team that was able to come out and compete this year.
Right. And, they play in the Mid-Penn, so they're facing stiff, very good competition. They seem to kind of give up towards the end of the season, though. They got blown out by Carlisle, which allowed Carlisle to make the playoffs as the 16th seed.
And also caused Harrisburg to have to play Wilson.
And if Harrisburg would have beaten Carlisle, they would have been the 14th seed and would have went to Exeter, which I don't think they would have fared much better.
No.
And Cedar Crest would have been at West Lawn. It flip-flopped, but, neither team put up much of a fight. Wilson beat up on Harrisburg, and Exeter did the same to Cedar Crest. But that's kind of was expected of a 1-16, 2-15, 3-14 matchup. And that's why it's likely that that's going away now that there are 6 classifications. District 3 is down to only 16 teams in the 6A classification, which means they're obviously not going to take all 16. you're likely looking at the top 8.
Yeah, and a lot of people, if you look at the first round scores from basically Quad A or AAA in District 3, where they take 16 teams, you look at those first round scores. I don't believe there were many upsets at all, and most of the scores were lopsided. And a lot of the upsets weren't really true. I mean, they are, because that's the way the power rankings work out, but most people would have picked the games that
right.
were
And the one
upsets.
we're talking to, which coincidentally has a lot to do with the next game we're going to talk about, is CD East beating Dallastown. CD East the 10 seed, Dallastown the 7 seed. But if you talk to coaches and media members and fans, they probably would tell you CD East, even though they were 6-4, was a better team than the 9-1 Dallastown, who had just lost a week prior to Red Lion, with a lot on the line to clinch the league title, undefeated run, undefeated season, and they couldn't get it done. So CD East, despite being the 10 seed, everyone expected them to beat the 7th seeded Dallastown, and that's what happened.
Right.
So, but before we get to that game, Wilson playing CD East, let's talk about the Harrisburg game. And like you said, final score 56-6. Harrisburg did not put up a lot of resistance. They just couldn't get anything going. They have some interesting players getting D1 looks, but they could not do anything against the Wilson defense, and the Wilson offense had their way with them as well. So why don't we dive in and take a look at some of the highlights while we talk about what happened at Gursky a few weeks ago. We're going to start out here with the Wilson offense. One of the things I guess we should point out, other than this spectacular run by Shane Dantzler making multiple tacklers miss, is the wind was very strong that night. Yeah. And one of the things that set up some Wilson scores was that exact weather phenomena. The punting game was just disastrous. We saw Harrisburg punt 2 or 3 times in the first quarter, and they might have been better off going for it.
Right, yeah. I think they had one punt that went literally 1 yard. And it was one of those where the ball was traveling backwards at the time it came down to the ground because the wind was so strong. Honestly, you're not going to have many high school punters to be able to do anything in that wind. Wilson struggled punting the very few times they needed to. It was just the wind was brutal. So that did set up some good opportunities for Wilson to get things going early.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that happened in this game was Wilson did not return a kick except for after Harrisburg's lone touchdown near the end of the fourth quarter, because Coach Doms and the staff decided to kick off to start the game. I believe they had to kick off to start the game, and they pinned Harrisburg with the bad weather, with the bad wind. But then Wilson was set to receive the second half kickoff, but they instead chose to defend a direction and allow Harrisburg to receive the ball if they so chose to, which they did. And I'm sure a lot of people were confused by that. But, I mean, look, you're up 49-0. It doesn't make much of a difference. You got better
position than you would have if you would have received the ball.
So allowing the remnants of the first team the short field to work with, have the defense stop them, Wilson be able to go down. I mean, it all worked out. It wasn't a big deal. I know some people would like to make a bigger deal out of it than it was, but it's not often you see teams return or kick off both times to start the first and second half, but that's what happened. So we're about halfway through the highlights against Harrisburg again. Just the big takeaways. Again, Wilson just kind of did what they wanted. Again, the Bulldogs led 49-0 at halftime. Probably the most interesting component was the Wilson defense held Harrisburg, and this is for the entire game, to just 99 total offensive yards. They had negative 26 on the ground.
That's crazy. Yeah, the defense was definitely ready to play against a team that can make some plays.
Perhaps the crazier stat is that on their lone touchdown in the fourth quarter, they went 77 yards for that touchdown, which means prior to that, they essentially had 22 total yards gained midway through the fourth quarter.
Yeah, as you're seeing right now, this was, I think, a play that came, I think it was in the second half. I'm not exactly sure. It might have been in the first half still. But Wilson kicked off, and Harrisburg just didn't get the ball.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be an onside kick.
No, like we said, the wind was crazy, so you were trying to, kick it maybe not quite as deep, but you were still, it was crazy how the wind was affecting You see a monster kick there with the wind.
He's kicking with the wind.
Right.
And now Mason McElroy is going to take this one down all the way, ready to go. So close. He's tackled at the 2. And we let him know about it, too.
We did.
But now Jake Gehman is going to take, again, out of the Wildcat or the heavy set and go in for one of his many scores there. Actually, Gehman and his teammate John Fox both scored 3 touchdowns against the Cougars. They scored 6 touchdowns combined against the Cougars. There are only 2 other touchdowns scored by anyone else on the field. John Fox actually had all 3 on the ground, while Jake Gehman had 2 on the ground and 1 through the air, which you just saw right there. It was perfect timing.
Yeah, way to cue that.
That was perfect. So again, Wilson just absolutely dominating, 56-6. This last play here in the highlights is going to be the final play of the first half. You're going to see an interception by Jake Gehman, but John Fox absolutely level the Harrisburg receiver in that Hail Mary there. And one of the final highlights here, we're going to see some backups, and JV gets some time. Backup quarterback Connor Yerg hands off to sophomore running back Trevor Hatley. And I believe that may have been the last touchdown of the game for Wilson. And there's the final score, 56-6. So another great effort by the team. And Wilson moves on to the second round of the playoffs. And as I mentioned, CD East upset Dallastown, according to the seeds, and got to come to Gursky for the round of 8 in the 2015 D3 Quad A playoffs. And before we move on to that, I guess we should do player of the game for the Harrisburg game, which was one of the 2 gentlemen that I mentioned, and that is Jake Gehman this time around. So our player of the game for Week 11, senior wide receiver cornerback Jake Gehman against Harrisburg. He had 4 rushes for 64 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He also added that 1 reception for 19 yards, which was a touchdown. We saw that in the highlights. So Gehman, once again, with his battery mate John Fox, contributing 3 touchdowns apiece. And Jake is our player of the game for Week 11, the first round of the playoffs, versus Harrisburg. All right, so we move on to the second round of the playoffs, hosting CD East, who Wilson had played in Week 2 at Landis Field, and came out on top of that game 38-0. The defense scored 2 touchdowns on fumble recoveries. They also added a fake punt touchdown. The offense was able to contribute 17 as well, and the defense did their part, shutting them down completely. And Wilson walked away with a 38-0 victory. It was a exclamation point because a lot of people were doubting the Bulldogs in Week 2 after not looking so great against Mifflin. And a lot of people actually picked the Panthers to win in Week 2, and Wilson would have nothing to do with that. Now, the Panthers came in looking a lot better towards the end of the season, and obviously beating Dallastown at Dallastown, and they came to Gursky and looked like a much different team than what we saw in Week 2.
Yeah, absolutely. They struggled to get anything going in Week 2. They did have a couple, but they had some heartbreaking mistakes in Week 2, like when they drive down to the 1-yard line and then give up a fumble that gets run back all the way for a touchdown. So while the game was lopsided in Week 2, it wasn't as lopsided as it may have appeared. And CD East, as they always will, and through that run of the Mid-Penn Conference, is going to get a lot better and get a lot of experience. And they were ready to go when they came to Gursky in Week 2 of the playoffs. And as we've put up on the screen, you can see that was the end of the Wilson season. CD East was able to, the names slip me, I'm sure you know, but the quarterback for CD
Jihad
East
Nyberger
had an amazing game.
Yeah.
He played a great game. I can't really speak to the game of his season because I don't know.
Well,
I'm sure he's had some other. But he was the guy you knew about coming in.
Yep.
And he made plays.
Well, he was their guy last year too. He was the junior starting quarterback safety last year. He set the tone.
Not a ton through the air, but a threat through the air because of the receivers that they have.
Right.
And he has an arm. He can throw it up there, but they're not going to beat you a lot through the air. They're going to beat you on the ground.
They threw it 16 times. They had 9 completions, but they only had 65 yards. Where they did their damage was on the ground. They had 50 rushes for 246 yards. You don't see Wilson giving up almost 250 yards on the ground very often. But CD East, and you mentioned it, they came in, they were ready to go. And they played like a team that didn't want to lose to Wilson for the 4th time in 14 months. Just a little over a year, these teams played 4 times.
Yeah.
They played in week 2 of the regular season. Both of those were pretty resounding Wilson victories. Last year in week 2, Wilson won 31-14. I think that kind of shocked a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because CD East was coming off of from 2013, they shocked people in the playoffs, beating Mifflin among other teams, looking good in 2013. They came in pretty stacked in 2014, and I think Wilson was actually up 31-0 in that game before they used their athleticism and scored 2 quick touchdowns. The final score was 31-14. They met in the Final Four of the district playoffs last year at Wilson, and Wilson eked out a 9-6 victory, kicking a field goal with, I believe, just a few minutes left to play in the game, pushing Wilson to the District 3 title game. Then, as I mentioned, in week 2 of this year, Wilson, on the scoreboard, beat up on CD East pretty bad, 38-0. But again, as Coach Dom's kind of said in the papers leading up to the game wasn't as big of a blowout or big as a beatdown from the Bulldogs as people thought it was, just looking at that final score of 38-0. Like we said, 2 defensive touchdowns, a special teams touchdown. The offense scored only 17 points.
Right.
The defense did some good things, but CD East seemed to be a little bit out of it at the time, and that was not the case.
And no, they
in
were
the second
clicking.
week of the playoffs.
They were clicking when they came to West Lawn this time.
Yeah, and like I said, they rushed for almost 250 yards against the Bulldogs defense that I mentioned going in. The varsity unit had given up only 36 points, and not a lot of the space that opposing teams were getting was through the ground.
Right. Yeah, and when you look at the starting defense, I guess twice this year gave up 20 points. And the starters, that is, and those end up being the 2 games that Wilson came out on from our view, the wrong end.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're obviously we're sitting here hosting the Bulldog Hour, so obviously we're going to say they came up on the wrong end of that one.
Arguably, Central Dauphin is up there. Obviously, one of the best teams they've played and is still there. And CD East lost this week in the playoffs, didn't they? Yeah,
yes.
To Cumberland Valley.
They just fell to Cumberland Valley, which actually ended up being on literally the last play of the game. CD East was down 16-14. Their kicker lined up for a field goal, and it was a short one, 21-yarder, so pretty much
he
close
was
to an extra
pretty
point.
well last week.
And Cumberland Valley busted through, blocked the kick, returned it for a touchdown for a final score of 22-14. So Cumberland Valley will play Central Dauphin in the District 3 championship game. Central Dauphin managed to hold on and beat Hempfield at Landis Field in overtime. They were able to score a touchdown following a Hempfield field goal in their first overtime possession. So the Rams won 27-14. So you'll have a Mid-Penn rematch in the district final. Central Dauphin actually lost to Cumberland Valley in the regular season, 17-14. Cumberland Valley kicked a last-second field goal of their own, a big 40-plus yarder to win the game for the Eagles. But the Rams were missing a bunch of key players.
7 starters
6, 7,
down.
8. Couple to injury, but I think there were some team suspensions going on for that. I know for a fact one of them was Mika Parsons. Did not play in that game, and actually I don't think he played for 4 or 5 games due to a violation of team rules. He is back now in the playoffs and will be on the field for the Rams against Cumberland Valley this coming Saturday in Hershey for the 2015 District 3 title game. But anyways, back to the Wilson stuff. The Wilson-CD East game actually went to overtime. I'm not sure we've said that yet. The game was tied 14-14. Wilson ended up getting the ball first. CD East elected to play defense first. Wilson offense went on the field and was stuffed on 4 downs. The field goal unit actually trotted out on the field. Wilson took a timeout and decided against the field goal. They wanted to try to score the touchdown, and that just wasn't going to happen. CD East defense just came through and stopped Shane Dantzler, and then CD East, I think on their second play on their possession in overtime, was able to get the touchdown, and that was it. The Wilson season came to an end. So we do have film from the game to show you, so let's jump to that right now.
Yeah, as we pull up the video, we like Joe mentioned, there were lots of things kind of coming into the game, kind of setting up, this rematch. CD East was well prepared and ready to go. Yet, early on,
Yep.
another huge special teams play, like in week 2. Different play. They ran the ball in week 2. Here they passed out of that fake punt, but that led to that set up Wilson's first touchdown of the game.
Which, sorry for the angle, the sideline view didn't work, so I had to go to the end zone. Of course, it was the opposite end zone. But yeah, the highlights are quick here because the Wilson highlights
Really
just
wasn't
weren't
a
too many to
whole
go
lot.
through. The fake punt, which Jake Klein returned from his lacerated kidney he suffered against McCaskey. He was back for this game, so he was doing punting, playing some outside linebacker. He took the fake punt, flew to Alex Teufert, set up the first touchdown that you saw. Then we saw a touchdown from Jake Gehman, and that was pretty much all that I clipped there. I think one of the plays that maybe we didn't get to mention or talk much about was the 4th and 1 play in the third quarter. Now, watching the film, getting ready for this show, I did see the referee blow the whistle and signal it dead. So a lot of people said he didn't do that he was making that up. It definitely did happen. Now, whether anyone heard it, that's beyond me, but it doesn't really matter because there's proof that he blew the whistle and did his hand thing that he has to do. But the more pressing question is, should it have been whistled dead? I think that's kind of more important because where he whistled it dead, Wilson was short. But the end of the play, Shane Dantzler and the Wilson offensive unit was about 4 yards past the marker. So when they moved the ball, about 6-10 inches short of the yard marker, the coaching staff and the Wilson sideline were not happy about it.
Yeah. And there was only one official whistling it dead. The others were letting it play on. Lots of what ifs, but that kind of leads to, the game itself had a lot of what ifs.
Yeah, and actually I'll pull this back up and let's take a look at it here. I have Shane Dantzler is highlighted here in the circle. You can see Wilson is facing about 4th and 1.5 or so. And this is the play that we're talking about here. You're going to see there in the heavy formation, it goes to Fox. Dantzler gets hit near the line, and you're going to see the ref blow it dead just short, but everyone else is still moving, and Shane ends up a good 4 yards past the line of scrimmage. But they walked it back, ruled Wilson was short. CD East got the ball. And, look where Wilson was.
Yeah.
Where Wilson would have had the ball. If they would have spotted it where they finished, it would have been about the 20-yard line. This is late in the third quarter. Wilson was still up 14-7. Mm-hmm. So this is a huge change for the referees. Some people say his momentum was stopped. That's where it should have been marked. And obviously others are going to say it was not, and the pile got pushed. It should have been a first down. We're not going to get into that conjecture because I don't know that one way or the other it's actually clear which it should have been.
Right.
So I'm not going to say that it definitely was a bad call. He definitely did blow the whistle. You can see that very clearly, that he was signaling dead, of course. Now, should he have done that is the bigger question. But we're not going to nitpick over calls like that.
No, like you said, Wilson still had the lead at that point. That wasn't in overtime or anything like that. Wilson had their opportunities. Obviously, we talk about who knows how things go differently from there. However, they had their opportunities. CD East capitalized on more of their opportunities that they had down the stretch, and that was kind of how the game ended up playing out.
Yeah, Wilson was, now to go back to the first half, and you saw it, Wilson was moving pretty good. They went up 14-0. They controlled the game. Now, CD's offense was moving. They just weren't getting points off their drives. We saw them miss a field goal, which from a certain angle at points looked good. Now, we weren't underneath it, so it's hard for us to say. Underneath the goalpost, it may have been wider than it looked from because we were way down to the other side of the field. CD East was moving the ball. They just weren't getting the points. But Wilson couldn't stop the run. Again, they allowed 246 yards on the ground, 15 first downs rushing, and CD East had 3 players with 78 or more rushing yards.
Yeah, if you tell me going into a game, a playoff game, especially that Wilson starting defense is going to give up almost 250 yards, I'm going to tell you that that's probably going to be a close game, and Wilson's probably going to struggle in that game, and that's what just because that's so atypical.
Yeah, right. No, it
Wilson
definitely
teams.
is.
That tells you something is off there, and that basically was kind of what it looked like.
Yeah, besides a few missed throws here and there, a couple drop passes that stand out, the other big statistics that stand out, one, Wilson didn't have any turnovers.
Right.
There weren't interceptions or fumbles, anything that could just give the ball to. Now, there were turnover on downs,
Right.
but none where
But there are those for both teams, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no interceptions or fumbles, and I mean, that's just shocking.
Yeah.
And also, Wilson only had one penalty accepted against them, so it's not like they were getting flagged often a lot. It's just they were outplayed on the field, which it doesn't happen often. So I mean, hats off to CDEs for coming with a great game plan. They played with incredible desire. Like we said, you don't want to lose to a team 4 times in 14 months.
And Wilson ended their season last year at Wilson. Like, they knew exactly what they were getting into here. And it's just they were ready to go, and they showed that again this week. They came up a little short, but they improved a lot from week 2, where they just weren't clicking to
night
the end of the season.
Night and day.
And again, that strength of that mid-Penn schedule, I think, helps them out a little bit, just because they're playing tough games.
As long as they don't
week.
give up and cave in, they get a few losses. Sometimes teams will give up.
Right.
They let it. They learn going through the gauntlet.
Yep.
And it definitely made them a better team for sure. The
Absolutely.
last stat and the last thing I want to focus on in this game, and this goes, when a team is running the way that they are with the game plan they're using, and they're operating it to a T, time of possession. CD East had nearly 30 minutes with the ball. Wilson just a shade over 18.
Yeah, that's gonna definitely when you look at how that kind of plays out in the defense, when they're running it right down your throat, Now I say that it wasn't like they were lining up in the I formation. Like it was lots of
it was
options
spread.
and keepers.
Yeah, it was spread.
And so
you're
they weren't necessarily running it down your throat.
You're
but
respecting
with that many rushing yards.
The athletic talent that they had and the spread formation they were running. It was tough to counter.
Right.
The runs up the middle, the quarterback keeping, and the option. We saw the option. They ran the option very, very well against the Wilson defense. But yeah, time of possession, CD East almost 30 minutes to Wilson's just a shade of 18. And then that was it. In overtime, CD East takes down Wilson by a score of 20-14, and that's how the 2015 season ended on the field. So the last player of the game to give out from the Bulldog Hour for the first year back is going to go finally to a defensive player, except when we did the cop-out against Manheim Township and chose the entire defense. We think that Ike Schonauer was the best player on the field for the Bulldogs against CD East, besides blocking on the offensive line, which, the Bulldogs did get over 150 yards on the ground and score 2 rushing touchdowns. But his play on defense was just phenomenal against CD East, and it's been phenomenal for the last 4 seasons. And Ike Schonauer had 23 tackles against CD East, which is a new Wilson program record. 11 of those were solo. So congratulations to Ike for being named the Week 12 Player of the Game from the Bulldog Hour. All right, so a couple things here to touch up before we go. We want to highlight some of the other individual performances from the year. In rushing, Shane Dantzler for the season had 76 carries for 583 yards and 7 touchdowns in 7 games. Obviously, he missed 5 full games because of his injury and didn't play fully in a few after he was back. Even with the season, which obviously wasn't nearly as long as he had expected due to the injury, he still ends up 3rd on the career carries list with 482, 4th on the career rushing list with over 3,300 yards, 3,357 to be exact. He's 3rd on career total yards, that's rushing and receiving combined, with 3,730, and he'll finish 7th on the career scoring with 234 points for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, moving on to passing, Colin Powers, who really, we talked about this before, kind of stepped into this role over the summer, and it was a little bit of an unsettled position. Did really well. He ended the season at passing at his completion percentage was 61.3%, which is great. If you can get up into the 60s, that's doing well. And he passed for 1,841 yards and 18 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. That's an amazing number.
The 2 interceptions will be the fewest interceptions, I believe, thrown by a Wilson starting quarterback quarterback.
Right. And that leads to a rating, where you're calculating here, of 152.63 over 12 games. That's an absurd number.
Right.
He really mastered the offense and got things going very well. And we mentioned played some of his best games in some of their biggest games.
Yeah, his best game of the year was against Central Dolphins.
Right. He plays one year, as quarterback where he's going to actually make any throws. He was 12th on the career yardage list, 5th on the career rating list, 2nd on the career completion percentage list, and 6th on the single season passing yards list. When you think about some of the quarterbacks that have played at Wilson, that's a pretty accomplished list there for an abbreviated tenure. A lot of the guys on those lists were multi-year starters.
Yeah.
And Colin got 1 year starter and really played a great year and helped lead this team.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And it's funny, looking back over the years now, Jake Templin last year. Now, we knew he was going to start because he did a couple spot starts in 2013 for Matt Timochenko when he had, I believe, mono. Jake Templin played a couple games as a junior, so we knew he was going to start, but I'm not sure how much was expected of him from the fans and the community, and he went on to have, depending on how you look at it, one of the greatest, if not the greatest season in Wilson quarterback history. He set the single season touchdown passes record and was just dynamic leading the offense, which the team went 14-1, winning a district title, going undefeated for the season. The 2014 season was a great one, and that was a lot of it had to do with the player Jake Templin. Colin Powers, the same thing here. No one really expected him to even have the job. We thought it was going to be Jake Klein. Back in the spring, and then as the summer goes on, you get into the summer workout sessions, and Colin really started to show the coaching staff something, and they knew the role that Jake was going to play on special teams and defense, and they're like, maybe it's better to let the quarterback be the quarterback, which Wilson doesn't like to play their quarterbacks both ways, and I can't even remember the last time a quarterback played both ways for Wilson, which we may talk about in a few minutes here. But yeah, Colin Powers, what a great year from him for the senior. And you went over the statistics and where he ranks on some of these lists now, and it's crazy. And I say this every year because it's been a while since Wilson's had a multi-year starter. Wouldn't it be great if one of these guys was back for another year? It's so awesome when you have a multi-year starter. It's a position so important, like a quarterback. But we may be having that here in the season coming up. But on to receiving now. We had a couple of big receivers this year, one of which will be back next year, and that's the leading receiver from the 2015 Bulldogs and tight end Alex Twyford. He had 33 catches, which was the team lead for 460 yards, also the team lead, and had 3 touchdowns in 12 games. Next was John Fox, also in 12 games. He had 19 catches for 403 yards, and the team leading 7 touchdown receptions. He's going to finish his career tied for 5th on the career touchdown receptions list. He only played receiver for 2 years.
Yeah, and interesting, all 3 of these guys we're going to mention here in the receiving also contributed in the rushing game.
Correct, yes.
The season went on.
And yes, Twyford, Fox, Gehman were right back there with Dantzler, depending on if it was the Wildcat or if it was the heavy set. But Fox's teammate Jake Gehman finished the season with 28 catches for 396 yards and 5 touchdowns in 11 games. He missed the McCaskey game. And he's going to finish tied for 8th on the Wilson career receptions list with 62. So both of them be in the record book multiple times, just to highlight there for each of them in the receiving facet. Looking at scoring for the season, Wilson put up a lot of points. John Fox and Jake Gehman both contributed 12 touchdowns this season between receiving and rushing. Alex Twyford had 9 touchdowns, and we know that he had 3 receiving. He had a few on the ground as well, and then defensively. And Shane Dantzler, despite only playing in 7 games, contributed 8 touchdowns as well. So why don't you take a look at the total offensive yards for the season, where some of the guys stacked up.
As we get to, as we mentioned, a lot of the guys that were receiving were also lined up in the backfield a number of times. Jake Gehman, when you add his rushing and receiving yards together, ends the year with 717 offensive yards. John Fox at 688, and Shane Dantzler, again with the shortened season, still got 636 yards.
Now, flipping the side of the field and looking at defense, you have to start with Ike Schonauer. But before we dive into his accomplishments, both this season and in his 4-year career, I do want to mention, and I said this earlier in the show during one of the highlights, but Some of the contributions from players maybe not expected to make as huge an impact on the stat sheet, Ben Harris and definitely Brett Kaufman, who had 6.5 sacks this year, I believe. That was the number that I looked at in the statistics. What a great year from him. Another one of those senior leaders that many people don't hear of, but then step up big time and have a phenomenal season. And that happens every year.
Yep.
But just to highlight Ben Harris, Brett Kaufman, great seasons from them. But Ike Schonauer, the leader of that defense for the last 2 seasons, starter for the last 3. We knew we were going to see big things from him, and he delivered. He had 82.5 tackles this season, or depending on how you calculate them. And we've gotten into discussion in the past with some of the players. According to the official stat sheet, it's 82.5. But if you look at the history books, they count the solo and the assisted in total. So a lot of people think assists count as half. So that would make him 82.5 this year. If he had 55 solo, 55 assists, you add them together, it's 110. But the official stat book's listed as 82.5. But the Wilson history book will list him at 110. And that's what we'll be talking about from here on out as we talk about some of the other players in their tackles. So Ike Schonauer, 110 tackles for the 2015 season. He had 11 for loss and 5 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery, and a breakup in all 12 games. And some of those get him on a program record or higher on the program record sheet because he's been doing that basically since he started playing for Wilson. He's 5th on the single season tackles list for the 2015 season at 110, but he's also 2nd with his year in 2013 and 8th with his year last year in 2014. He also will end up 11th on the career sacks list, getting 11.5 in his 4 years, and the big one, which we just mentioned, in his last game played for the Bulldogs on Gursky Field, he totaled 23 tackles against CD East, which is a single game record. I think the closest off the top of my head was 18 or 19, so he obliterated the record.
Yeah, that's hard to do.
And with his performance there, getting first on the single game tackles list, he also finds himself 3rd and 10th on the single games tackle list. I believe one of those also coming this year. I think he had 16 earlier this season in a game. So obviously he makes a lot of tackles. So this shouldn't surprise anyone that he finishes 2nd on the career tackles list, right behind one of the only, not only linebackers, but any player to play for the Bulldogs to play and start all 4 years. Colton Weaver is number 1 with 360. Ike Schonauer finishes 2nd with 346 tackles in 4 years.
That's amazing.
It is absolutely incredible. And there's if he wasn't on that 2012 team as a freshman, he possibly could have been starting, but that team was so stacked. It was tough for him to break the rotation. Now he saw time. He saw varsity time. But it's crazy to think that there's players like Colton Weaver who started for 4 years, when a player like Ike Schonauer was only for 3 in a handful of games. Nothing major there for him. But congratulations to Ike. What an incredible career there for the 3rd of 4 Schonauer boys, which we've got Wyatt for 2 more years. So there's still a Schonauer to watch on the turf at Gursky. Why don't you finish up with the last defensive player to highlight, which we've talked about a lot already in Mr. John Fox. Yeah,
John Fox kind of just been everywhere on the field, just like all the games. To kind of look at his defensive statistics here, 42.5 tackles, 28 solo, 29 assists, 3.5 for lost, 2 interceptions, 3 breakups, and a block kick in the 12 games for the year. So if you look at his career totals, he's 10th. He's tied for 10th on career interceptions list with 9, and 11th on the career tackles list with 180.
Yeah, and the career tackles list in Wilson program history, again, will give John 57 tackles for this year, 28 solo, 29 assists, which will bump him up to 180, which is good for 11th in Wilson program history. Once again, another 4-year player, 3-year starter, and just a leader of the defense with Ike the last 2 seasons. And speaking of John Fox, we should wrap this up here and award our Player of the Year. In case you couldn't tell by that terrible segue, it is going to be Mr. John Fox for his efforts of the 2015 season. we're naming John our 2015 Player of the Year from the Bulldog Hour. Now, this one was a tough one to pick. It seemed every week there were, like we said, 2 or 3 guys. It was tough to pick out a player of the game. When it all came down, we didn't want to cop out and pick 2 or 3 people. We ended up going with the one, and we thought it should be John Fox for his play this season in all facets of the game. But Jake Gehman, Ike Schonauer, Colin Powers, and a plethora of linemen. It's so hard to gauge the impact of the linemen, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And don't think we're overlooking you guys. It's tough. It's really tough to do. When it all came down to it, we just thought John Fox had one great year and one great career for the red and white, and he is our 2015 Player of the Year. So congratulations to John and the entirety of the players for the 2015 Bulldogs, 10-2, extending a ton of streaks and doing the Wilson community and school district proud.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the season didn't, necessarily come to the end that some of the guys had hoped for, but they played a lot of good football this year, and were exciting to watch, and kept things going, and some of the younger guys got some experience too, so hopefully they can keep it rolling into next year.
Speaking of next year,
thank you.
Yeah. I guess before we go to next year, 2016, looking just a little bit at what is coming back, a couple thank yous we want to mention coming out from the Bulldog Hour. First, John Fox's grandparents, the Hendersons, have been supporters of the show and have helped us a great deal. So we want to thank them, the Hendersons, for their contributions to the Bulldog Hour this season. And also the Wilson Athletic Department, Drew Kaufman and his contributions and words of wisdom and everything along the way as we did this year. We want to thank Drew and his contingent at the athletic office. And also, the football team. We kind of were given almost unlimited access or whatever we could from the players and coaches and the staff, both on the sideline, in the locker room, before and after games, throughout the season and the preseason. And we just want to thank Coach Doms, his entire staff, and all of the players, from the seniors to the freshmen. Thank you for a good first year for us, and thank you for allowing us so much access to get this show out to the people that are interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't be possible without those contributions.
All right, so put a bow on the 2015 season, and very quickly before we leave here for the final time this year in the debut season of the Bulldog Hour, we're going to look at 2016, and here are just a few, if you're watching, a list of players that are returning that were starters this year, key contributors this year, or may have even been injured and not being able to play this year. Most of these are juniors to be seniors, but there are a couple at the end that are sophomores to be juniors. The starters, Fode Jallo started at wide receiver and outside linebacker. He'll be back. Same thing with Alex Twyford, tight end, defensive end. Inside linebacker, Leo Quigley. Offensive tackle and defensive end, Isaiah Regal. Offensive center, Jake Morris. Tommy O'Brien, who kind of filled in a bunch of different areas. I don't know if anyone actually named him a starter, but he played so much he absolutely has to be included on this list, and he'll be seeing a lot of time at running back and safety. He also filled in at linebacker because of the injuries this year, so it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, because if someone else steps up at safety, he may shift down the linebacker. We saw that happen with Johnny Rafe Snyder a few years ago. With the emergence of John Fox, he was able to shift down to an outside linebacker position. Among the other names, some of the younger guys, especially, we mentioned Wyatt Schonauer, but Connor Uhrig is the one that we alluded to a little bit ago, talking about what's going to happen at quarterback with Colin Powers leaving. Connor Uhrig, the second half of the year and into the playoffs, when a backup had to come in at quarterback, Uhrig was the first one they turned to, and he's only a sophomore. And we saw him at times able to do it through the air, but especially do it with his feet. And he is absolutely a dual-threat guy. It'll be interesting to see if they change the offense at all to take advantage of what he'll bring to the table. He's probably the closest that they'll get to Seth Klein from a few years ago. Since then, you have more pure pocket guys in Matt Timochenko and Colin Powers. Now, Jake Templin had the ability to do it, but they preferred him to stay in the pocket. So Uhrig will be the first in a few years now that he really is a dual threat through the air and on the ground. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if he's the one that gets the job. There's a stable of quarterbacks that they could turn to, but Uhrig seems to be the one that they were favoring as the year ended. And like we mentioned, if he does get the job, he'll only be a junior, so he'll be a Wilson quarterback for 2 years. And also the two-way thing. He was also kind of one of the first ones off the bench in the secondary. And could he possibly see some time at safety? That's up in the air. If he gets the quarterback job, I would say probably not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that they have to kind of sort out there yet. But like you said, just going off of the things that we saw this year, definitely raises that possibility for next year.
Yeah, so, well, I think that about does it for us here on the Bulldog Hour, at least for 2015. We'll put the show for the season to bed here with 4 episodes. We'd like to come back and do it more next year. We'll see what happens. There's always the issue of funding, which we do this on our own dime and on our own free time, which we love to do. It's been a lot of fun doing these first 4 episodes. I'd love to do it again more next year. We'll see what happens. And we just want to mention before we sign off the contributions from some of our sponsors. Mostly my dad at May's Sandwich Shop helped us get things started this season for the show. So thanks again to Bill and the folks at May's Sandwich Shop for supporting us. And do you have anything to say to wrap up the show or the 2015 season?
Just to kind of reiterate the thank yous that you kind of mentioned before. Lots of people contributing in different ways to kind of allow us to be able to do it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. So I think with that, we will finish the show here for the final time for the 2015 season. So until the late winter or early spring, when we finally know what's going on with the PAAA stuff, we'll debut season 2 of the Bulldog Hour sometime in the future. Definitely like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Follow us on all those social networks so you know when the next episode will be airing. And if you have the ability, definitely contribute in any way possible, whether it's a straight donation or if it's through our Patreon campaign where you pledge per video. Every little bit helps to keep the show going because we definitely want to be able to do that. So I think that's it. Congratulations to the coaching staff and the players on another successful Wilson football season. 10 wins, another league title. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, signing off for the 2015 season.
So that's it for 2015. I'm Joe Mays.
And I'm Justin Raffoff.
And go Bulldogs.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Bulldog Hour. Want more Wilson football? Follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Or visit www.bulldoghour.com. The Bulldog Hour is a featured program on jmnjrradio.com.